Hello everyone, thank you for coming out, I really appreciate you. Welcome to Design at Record-Breaking Scale. My name is Nick Awajin. I'm Senior Designer at that game company, and this is going to be a presentation about how we designed an hour-long emotional musical experience for 10,000 players in a game designed just for 8. A little bit about myself so you know who you're hearing from. I did play a key role in concepting, designing, and implementing this project, so it really means a lot to me. I've also spent a lot of time contemplating what design means at this scale, because prior to game development, I was actually in architecture and I studied urbanism, and in those fields, we create spaces for people, which there happen to be more than 8 of. So, the behavior of any single person is extremely difficult to predict over time. The behavior of 5 or 10 people, you can forget about that. 20 is even worse still. But after a certain population, the actions of each individual dissolve away into the shared trajectory of everyone else's, which, as it turns out, may be far less complicated to project, and if we're courageous enough, dare I say, even design for. This is the premise behind Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy, not Aurora's musical voyage, but it does reflect what we experienced designing and developing it. It groups not 2 or 8 or even 800 or even 8,000 players, but 10,000 co-located human beings in an interactive virtual space as one big, supermassive group. Let's take a step back and talk about Sky first. Sky itself is a social MMO where you can hold hands, hug, fly, and otherwise explore the history of a once great kingdom as a total of up to 8 players. This is what Sky is normally, a social, awe-inspiring experience all about sharing intimate moments with small groups of close friends. This is part of our long studio heritage here at that game company of creating emotional games that connect people, especially by exploring our shared humanity. Now, Aurora herself is a talented and award-winning Norwegian musician. Aurora has a lot of hits on her hands, and many people don't know this, but she actually sang the credits for Sky already. So there was a pre-existing relationship between the two of us. The Aurora concert is a fusion of Aurora and Sky at a much bigger scale. It explores what it feels like to be connected to thousands of people. I'm going to share a little highlight reel to help you understand what that actually was. And keep in mind that as we watch this, all of the creatures you see, all the jellyfish, the birds, the mantas, etc., these are all real people playing alongside each other in real time. I was just telling them earlier, every time I see it, I just go like, I can't believe we did that. It's amazing. For nearly an hour, music, visuals, mechanics, and yes, 10,000 players blend into an experience I'm clearly really proud to have worked on. But importantly for us, it holds 2 Guinness World Records. 1 for most players in a concert-themed virtual world, and 2 for most avatars emoting simultaneously. I'm fairly certain there are other records that we qualify for, but those are the official ones at the very least. So let's talk about what we learned making it. In this talk, we're going to go over these concepts. Then at the very end, we're going to grab some takeout, and I'm going to treat you all to a little bit of dessert. And importantly, along the way, there are going to be countless analogies, mainly because it helps me understand things when I analogize it to something else. And our guides will be these friendly folks. I made these. These are personifications of all of those concepts we saw earlier, because it's fun, and also because I think it helps with when a concept is physicalized somehow. So let's meet this group. This is Scale. Everyone say hello, Scale. Hello, Scale. Scale wants us to know that it is impossible to conceptualize scale, and that we need to remember how special every individual is. Okay, let's try to conceptualize things at this scale. 10,000 is big. It's really, really big. In fact, I think it's so uniquely big that we need a new term to help us talk about it: supermassive group. For context, Sky is designed for 8 people, or to say it differently, accommodates 0.08% of our intended player count. This is a clip from Powers of 10, a 1977 short documentary by Charles and Ray Eames, all about scale. So you can see the difference between what scale means at 1 meter for 1 person, all the way up to 10,000 meters for 10,000 people. Of course, if you're going by square meters, you would have stopped earlier. But the fact still stands, that is enormously large. And that was the first lesson that we learned, was that it is simply impossible to properly and consistently conceptualize the size of such a group. It's just so big. Our mental number lines bias towards smaller numbers, and Dunbar's number, which is the theoretical upper limit for how many people humans can maintain in their social networks at any given time, is just 150. We want to obliterate far, 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 far past it. So I will be defining supermassive group with absolutely no authority to mean a group of concurrently active and co-located real-time networked players in groups of 1,000 or more. But in our case, we're talking 10 times that, 10,000. All the while, somehow, we have to still ensure that the humanity of each participant shines through. Because what's the point of being around 9,999 other individuals if you don't feel their humanity next to you? These are seemingly contradictory design goals. Explore scale, but every single individual person is special. It hasn't really been explored in media. There was one example, however, that I found, which is Alan McCullum's Over 10,000 Individual Work series, which does precisely this. Takes 10,000 unique individual objects and places them next to each other, places them in context of each other, and because of that, the whole that they create is made all the more special. So we want to do this, but interactive, and to music, with real people, on mobile, for an hour. This has never been done before, so we have to chart our own path here. So thank you very much, Scale, for making us feel really good about ourselves, but for teaching us the important lesson that it is impossible to conceptualize things that are this big, and reminding us that we need to make sure every individual is special. Well, let's say we've done this. How can we start organizing things? How do we start, planning our design? Well, our good friend Structure, who ought to be in all of our projects. Structure, narrative spine, or we're going to have anarchy, and that spine should be about the group's groupness. What do we mean by this? Well, one of the earliest and perhaps most intuitive lessons we learned was that the more actors you introduce in a system, the noisier it all gets. So we need to make sure we have a really strong spine that establishes order and meaning, so that even among all of that noise, it's still a clear, cohesive experience. So for us, that was creating a grand story arc for the entire experience, defined by emotional highs and lows. We developed a narrative about humanity and nature, and yes, these are the actual design documents. They're very artistically beautiful and the great designer kind of way. It explored the different emotional stages of being and not being in community with others. It explored contrasting social themes like selfishness and selflessness, togetherness and isolation. We told each of these stories through each song as the concert unfolded, with each song containing within it its own story in its own landscape. Selecting stories about group sizes and the emotional aspects of being in a community helps ensure that at the highest level, the fundamental type of experience that players are looking to have is thematically compatible with the type of experience you are looking to create as a developer. That seems like kind of obvious, but it can be easy to overlook this. So we developed another similarly large-scale project later, Season of Passage, that I think failed to deliver the same emotional impact as the concert due to a number of reasons, but one of which was a misalignment at this scale. For Season of Passage, we were focusing on big group gameplay activities, and so that's what we invested all of our time into. But unfortunately, what we weren't able to do was resolve a narrative that also had to do with community. So that ultimately, unfortunately, got cut from the story before it shipped, even though that was a part of our earliest concepts all along. So Season of Passage wound up being you playing gameplay activities with lots and lots of other people and then having an intimate story with just a handful of NPCs. That made things a little confusing and inconsistent for players, you know? It's like, why are you even here? I've been talking with these NPCs and then now I'm doing something with 100 other people. It doesn't really make sense. There was a lot that went into Season of Passage, but this particular narrative and structural point is one that I feel we thankfully managed to avoid with the Aurora concert, because the story itself was all about being in a group. It was about being in a community. So thank you, structure. Now we know we need a narrative spine and that it should be about the group's groupness. But what about design guidelines? We're designers anyway. First and foremost, our friend Simplicity is here to remind us that our technical constraints will always be our design constraints, whether or not we're designing at this scale, but importantly that at this scale, the group itself will fill in the silence created by those very technical constraints. So, where we've been in like concept diagrammy land for so long, now we need to make it a reality. So technically speaking, like how do we even support 10,000 players? What does that mean? How does that work on the game? Ultimately, what we arrived at was a solution that gave us, the designers, the positional data for each player, and in order to render all 10,000 at the screen at the same time, we would render each of these individual avatars as kind of a more simplified geometry. In this case, we're looking at a torture test of all kinds of abstracted Sky kids, which are the characters that we colloquially call in Sky. But they didn't just have to be abstracted humanoid shapes. Very quickly we learned that maybe they could be birds or jellyfish, mantas, butterflies, and we used all of these for the concert. These simplified models worked well given our technical constraints. But that was pretty much it, the position of that bird, knowing that that bird is a player, and the bird could emote. And that was pretty much all we had to work with for a really long time. But that began to define the central design principle for this chapter of the talk, which is simplicity. Let me share an example of what I mean. So I had a lot of early self-conscious attempts to supposedly enrich the experience with more stuff. So this is one of my test levels. Because it's hard to fathom, as we've established, this many players in the same place at the same time, I often over-designed the experience because I was trying to preemptively fill in the gaps created by the narrow technical limitations that we knew we would get. I thought, if all I have is positions and that's it, I really need to crank up everything else. So this was an early iteration